I just saw the Fantastic Four First Steps 4 times in 4 days. Was that overkill? Probably, but I had a different experience with the film each time I saw it. Some good and some bad. Watching a movie back to back so many times really brings to the surface what worked and what didn't. So in this video, I'll talk you through my experience, how my perception of the film changed, and if I think Fantastic Four First Steps holds up after 4 viewings. Also, before we get into it, spoiler warning for literally everything. So the first time I saw this film, I was exhausted. I was at San Diego Comic-Con from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., where I actually got to see the costumes from the film and even meet Herbie. But by the time I got to the movie theater at 6:45 p.m., my back was sore, my feet hurt, and I was just ready to close my eyes. Pair that with the fact that I saw the movie in a small theater that wasn't IMAX or Dolby, I didn't have a good viewing experience. I think the circumstances and my expectations got in the way of me truly enjoying the film. I am a lifelong Fantastic Four fan, so I was constantly comparing the movie to the comics from the 60s and mostly focusing on the differences. For starters, I thought Reed Richards didn't have the same bravado that he had back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days. They really focused on Reed's insecurities in this movie, which I later realized served the story in more interesting ways, but it threw me off at first. Reed also doesn't use his powers meaningfully throughout the entire movie, and I still feel this way. He is the quote-unquote leader of this group, but his performance in this movie doesn't feel like he earns that title. All of his plans fail in one way or another, and ultimately I left the least satisfied with Reed. And I thought the plot was fine, but it didn't really have any high highs or low lows for me. I never felt wowed by this movie. There was no moment that made me want to cheer or made me want to cry. It just felt like things were happening in front of me, but they weren't connecting deeply. Part of this was because I thought Galactus was not as interesting as I expected him to be, character-wise or visually. There's that one scene where Silver Surfer comes back to him after getting trapped in the black hole, and all he says was, "I need the child. I need that child," over and over again. I didn't think there was much depth to his motivation or cleverness to how he hunted the child. He was just like, "Papa's gotta eat." And like I said, I didn't even think he looked that cool. His bright, otherworldly representation from the comics was reduced to a desaturated machine body in the film, and that didn't work for me on first watch. But I think most controversially, I felt like there were a lot of chemistry issues between the core cast. Reed and Sue are more often than not depicted as fighting or at least contentious, and I didn't really buy the love that should be holding them together through it all. I didn't think Johnny and Sue were anything alike despite them being siblings. And I know they're such different characters by nature, but they didn't really have any crossover in their traits at all except for the blonde hair and blue eyes. Ben Grimm had a fun personality, and I loved Evan Moss Bachrach's voice guiding the character, but he kind of felt more like a friend than family to the rest of them. But I did like that moment between him and Reed where he calls Reed Stretch and tells him to stop feeling bad about the accident. The movie needed more moments like that, but because most of this movie's emotional moments revolve around Franklin, the relationships between the other characters get sidelined. If I had to score this movie after my first viewing, I would have given it a 6 out of 10. And because of all of this, I walked out of the theater thinking, there must be something wrong with me. This movie is getting rave reviews. Am I just not in the headspace? I felt determined to give this movie another shot before writing this review, but I also wanted to get this review out quickly, so I booked an IMAX ticket for the next day at like noon. And I cannot believe what a difference the second time made. I don't know if it's because my expectations were already tempered or because of the IMAX screen, but the environment was so much more inviting and enticing. And long story short, I was very impressed upon my second watch. A lot of the qualms I had the first time around just washed away. Maybe it was just Stockholm Syndrome, but I genuinely just felt like I understood the movie's intentions better the second time, which allowed me to focus on the good. So first, in regards to the plot, I loved the existential dread that Galactus caused on the Earth. The movie was not afraid to sit in that feeling, and the stakes felt gigantic because of it. It reminded me a lot of one of my favorite modern Fantastic Four comic runs, Fantastic Four Life Story, which is a reimagining of their origin story where the gang actually sees Galactus when they go into space for the first time. They come back to Earth terrified and spend decades preparing for the eventuality of Galactus. And once Galactus finally comes, the stage is set for an epic showdown. And with that comparison, I realized that Galactus in this movie is not the main villain. The main enemy they're fighting against is fear, and Galactus is just a vehicle for that fear. Sure, I would have loved a bit more cleverness or visual intrigue from that character, but he accomplishes a lot more than I gave him credit for during my first watch. Plus, the Silver Surfer is an extension of Galactus, and the exploration of her character was lovely. She offered parallels to the Fantastic Four trying to save their own worlds, and she was put in that position so many years ago. And Johnny trying to appeal to the human side of her felt more emotionally compelling the second time around. In fact, Johnny as a whole clicked for me more the second time, seeing his full arc of wanting to go back to space and contribute to the team in a meaningful way with the translation. I don't know why it took 2 viewings for me to appreciate his growth and greater contribution to the team, but I'm glad I got there. I still think Ben could have felt more familiar toward Reed, Sue, and Johnny, but I get that he's more of an outsider who's going through his own unique pain from the transformation. And like I teased earlier, I understood Reed's role much more the second time. His insecurities were amplified due to the existential crisis happening in more than one part of his life, and I think it's reasonable for his character to have been acting skittish throughout that. I do think they should make strides to calm that worrying side of him in future projects though, as I'd love to see a confidence grow within him. I was never a fan of the Pedro Pascal casting for Reed, and even now I kind of wish another actor took on the role, but I will say that Pedro acted his ass off with the script he was given. His expressions are so varied throughout the film, and the subtlety of his performance really deserves praise. But obviously the most fleshed out character of the four is Sue Storm, and as everyone is saying, she really is the heart and soul of this movie. I love how she counterbalances Reed with human rationale, whereas Reed's mind always goes analytical when problem solving. The intricacies of why she feels the way she feels in any given moment are justified, and I think her birth scene is the most moving scene in the film. It really summarizes how important family is to them, and how they'll move mountains to make sure everything's okay for her. So the chemistry issue that I was talking about earlier really faded into the background for me upon second watch. Another thing I appreciated more the second time was Franklin's involvement in the story. I know how important of a character Franklin is in the Marvel Comics universe, so I guess I was expecting more from him when I saw the movie at first. I thought they were going to go really wacky with his powers, his time traveling, and I had theories that John Malkovich was going to play an older version of Franklin. Shows how much I know. But they kept Franklin mostly as the inciting force around the events for other characters in this movie, only giving us a glimpse of what he can do toward the end. And as I sit here and think about it, I think it's good that they didn't play all their cards yet. Obviously, Franklin was a core part of the post-credit scene, which we will talk about momentarily, but I think we'll get into the more multiversal components of Franklin's story very soon. And when talking about the family as a whole, I love how this film presented them like the royal family in the UK. The whole world loves them. They're doing things like betting on the odds of their baby's gender. They are a worldly source of entertainment while also being Earth's protectors, and that fills the film with a sense of camaraderie and hope that is so uniquely 60s. And speaking of the film being set in that era, one of my favorite choices in the film was having the whole world come together against Galactus to work toward a common goal. Watching the Earth conserve energy and build teleportation bridges made me wish that our world felt that united. And it created a distinction between Earth 828 and Earth 616 for me, because the Avengers would never be able to achieve that same level of trust from humanity. I think once the Fantastic Four arrive at Earth 616 for Doomsday, there will be some humbling involved, and it'll be interesting to see them navigate not being revered heroes. And if not humbled from Earth 616, they will surely be humbled by Doctor Doom, who we of course see the silhouette of in the first post-credit scene. Every time I saw the movie, the theater went berserk. I love that we even got a little glimpse at the mask, which means that this Doom is comfortable taking it off. I wonder if his face will be scarred, or if they'll try to preserve Robert Downey Jr.'s face for the star power. I'm leaning toward him being disfigured since Franklin is reaching out to touch his face, almost implying that Doom took off the mask so Franklin wouldn't feel scared. But I am over the moon that we're finally going to get Doom in the MCU, and seeing just a bit of him gives me the most excitement I felt regarding the MCU in a long time. That's the moment in the movie that deserves cheers, even if it wasn't in the actual movie itself. But in the actual movie, I do like the two little nods toward Latveria and their representative being absent from their UN meetings. I just love Doom. He's my favorite character in all of Marvel Comics. I'm wearing a Doom shirt right now, and I am completely biased. If this movie was never going to have Doom in it, I think they handled his lack of inclusion just fine by throwing us a few bites to nibble on. And overall, my second viewing of this film completely changed how I felt about it. At this point, I would have given the film an 8 out of 10, jumping up 2 points from my initial impression into the upper echelon of Marvel films. But before we move on to my third viewing, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy what you've seen so far. Now you may be asking yourself, Vinny, if you were already satisfied after having seen the movie twice, why did you go to see the movie for a third time the next day? And my answer would be, because my girlfriend hadn't seen it yet, and we bought tickets together that predated my other two. But believe it or not, I was actually excited to see it again. I wanted to see which of my opinions she would validate. Would she have a bad experience seeing the movie for the first time like I did, or would she love it from the get-go? And I'm happy to report that she loved it from the start, and that I officially can't be trusted regarding my opinions if I've only seen a movie once. And believe it or not, I liked the movie even more the third time. It's as if this movie could do no wrong since I had already forgiven its mistakes and decided that I could just have fun with it. Some of the sillier parts like the Mole Man's inclusion and Johnny calling the Silver Surfer sexy just became fun to me, even though they felt a bit out of place the first 2 times I'd seen the movie. And speaking of the Mole Man, I'm glad he came back in the third act and made a real contribution to the story. If you don't know, they included this character in the film because he's the first ever villain the Fantastic Four fight in the comics, so it seemed like a decision to respect the legacy of that first appearance. And I would have been satisfied with a throwaway cameo, but they gave us so much more. They work Subterranea into the film seamlessly. I would love if something is going wrong on Earth 616 in Doomsday and Sue suggests evacuating New York to Subterranea and everyone is just like, what? It's another fun quirk that separates these universes, and Paul Walter Hauser's performance injects some fun into an otherwise very grim third act. I also found myself really loving Herbie. Even in Star Wars projects, I don't usually gravitate toward the droids. I've never felt the need to have a toy of them on my desk. But immediately after my third showing of Fantastic Four, I was scouring the internet for all of the Herbie memorabilia I could find. He is also supremely useful in the film, carrying out so many tasks to the point where I don't know if the Fantastic Four would even function without him. What I will say is that once you know what's going to happen in the last fight with Galactus, it kind of dampens the experience after a few watches. Literally every part of their plan fails until Sue just decides to tank the entire task and push Galactus like she's Patrick pushing Bikini Bottom. As soon as the final fight started, I was just waiting to see Doom again. I would have liked to have seen the team contribute in a more meaningful way to the final showdown so that repeat viewings were just as exciting to watch, but not every element of the film is always going to be perfect. And like I said, the third experience watching this movie actually made me love it even more. I don't like giving fractional scores, but I'd say my enjoyment went up to about an 8.5 out of 10 after the third showing. It didn't quite go up to a 9 as some cracks were starting to show through like the final battle, but overall I had way more fun this time around. Which brings us to the fantastic fourth showing of this film. And you're probably asking yourself, why on earth did you go see this movie for a fourth time? And the answer is, after I saw it for the third time in 3 days, I was like, 4 times in 4 days sounds like a really good YouTube title. So essentially I just went in for the joke. But that wasn't going to stop me from watching the movie analytically. So how do I think the movie held up? It held up pretty much the same. However, like in my third viewing, I found myself waiting for certain moments. I found myself waiting for the four to go into space and essentially start their adventure. When they came back, I found myself waiting for the public to just get over wanting to turn over Franklin to Galactus. Like it was not rational at all, but I was like, you guys will be fine, you have nothing to worry about, I know where this goes. It just felt like the dips in this movie were more noticeable on the fourth watch, but that would be the case with just about any movie that you had watched back to back to back to back. But I think this viewing did take off my rose-colored glasses just a bit. Reed's plan seemed a bit more undercooked to me again. Galactus felt a little less threatening since I already knew where the movie was going. I don't think these things made the movie any objectively worse than during the first time I clocked them, but I slowly realized that they weren't as forgivable. And if I had to give a number score after this final viewing, I'd go back to an 8, which is a very solid score on this channel. Was it worth seeing 4 times in 4 days? Absolutely not. But I don't think I'll ever forget the ride I went on with this movie. This has been my most anticipated Marvel movie for the last 4 years, coincidentally, and going all out for its release felt fitting. After all is said and done, I think this movie's strengths are at their highest when they are experimenting, doing something different from the typical Marvel formula. The focus on the family and the overarching dread are 2 unique selling points of this film, along with its retro-futuristic style. And I think the things that hold this movie back aren't on my usual list of complaints for Marvel movies. Rarely does an MCU movie not utilize its central character to the fullest when it comes to their powers, and I think they could have done a lot more with Reed throughout this movie. They could have thought through his plan much more, and I feel like fans would have appreciated the quote-unquote smartest man in the universe showcasing a bit more of that IQ. But what did you think of this movie? Did it live up to all of the hype in the review scores? Let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to stick around for future content. Thanks so much for watching, and have a good one.